Okay, good morning again. So this is chapter 2, culture and interpersonal communication. So let's take a look, first of all, at the relationship between intercultural and interpersonal dimensions of communication. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Okay, so let's, uh, this first slide is very vocabulary heavy, and would encourage you. Every chapter's got a ton of vocabulary. And one way that you can demonstrate that you have a certain level of mastery in any field is to use the vocabulary of that field. Think about it this way. If you go to the doctors and the doctor says to you, well, I can see that you have a boo-boo, you're not going to have a lot of confidence in that person. Or let's say you're a musician and you go, audition to play with a group, and you're the drummer and you've left your drumsticks at home accidentally, and you say, oh my gosh, I forgot those things that I used to hit the drum. Even if you're the best drummer in the world, they won't have a lot of confidence in you. So it's a good idea to get started using some of the vocabulary. Okay, and here's a really important one. If you actually went online and Googled culture, you would find many, many definitions, but we're going to use the one from Samovar. So culture is language, values, beliefs, traditions, and customs that people share and learn. Okay, that makes sense. That's what a culture is. And then the textbook makes a weird, well, not weird, okay, kind of weird, unusual statement that the definition shows that culture is a matter of perception and definition. What does this mean? When you identify yourself as a member of a culture, you must A, recognize yourself and others as sharing certain characteristics, and B, see others who don't possess those characteristics as members of different categories. So there's the perception. You to an outsider, you might look at a group of people and they say, yeah, we all belong to the same culture, and you say, oh, I don't see it. Your perception is different. Okay, and in part it's different because of what we consider in groups. And I need to sidetrack myself because I got carried away. There is a great video, and I will find the link and upload it, about Jane Elliott. You might have seen it. Many years ago, she did an experiment with blue eyes, brown eyes, and I'll put it up so you guys can take a look at it and tell me what you think about it. So, in any culture, there are things that we call in-groups and out-groups. So an in-group is any group that you belong to. It has nothing to do with that, those are the cool people. Okay? It just, a group to which you belong is an in-group. You happen to like superhero movies. So anyone else who likes those superhero movies is part of your in-group. And anyone who thinks that they're dumb they're not in your group, so they are members of an out-group. Okay, again, let me reiterate. It has nothing to do with what a society considers to be better. It's not like you're some of the cool kids. It just happens to be the groups with which you identify, and the ones that you don't are the out groups. Okay, which getting to this idea of identity. Social identity is the part of the self-concept that is based on membership in groups. So if you were to answer the question, who are you? You might look at things like age. My daughter thinks it's really funny that I'm actually a boomer, so she started saying, okay, boomer. Okay. And I can't think of a witty comeback to that. Again, who are you? You could look at your race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, nationality, geographic reason, physical disability, religion, activity. There's so many things that make up your social identity. And when you think about all these different little groups that you might belong to, all of these little groups are considered co-cultures. They are cultures within a larger culture. So if we think of the United States as being the overarching culture, what are some of the co-cultures that exist that you belong to, or that you can see that other people belong to? So I think it's interesting where they talk about they divide the United States into three general regions: the North, New England, and Mid-Atlantic states, and people who live there are considered temperamental and uninhibited. South and Midwest were friendly and conventional, and West Coast, Rocky Mountains, and Sun Belt were relaxed and creative. Okay, so that's maybe one of your co-cultures has to do with where you belong, or where you are currently living. Okay, so just because we interact with someone who is from a different culture does not mean that our communication is always going to be intercultural communication. So there are degrees of cultural significance. So let me give an example. I was raised in Plainville, Connecticut. Definitely middle class, white. My husband is from Niger in West Africa. Definitely, well, I guess in Niger he would have been considered middle class, but from the U.S. we could have considered him poor, black. So we're communicating about driving. He's telling me he does not like the way that I drive. Is that an intercultural difference? Not really. I don't. His culture has nothing to do with that issue. Let's say we're having a discussion about how we should raise our children. That is a huge intercultural difference. Where the way he was raised has a big impact on how he thought our children should be raised, and the way that I was raised had a big impact on how I thought our children should be raised. And our communication was definitely intercultural at that point. There's an interesting word here, salience. We tend to use it more not as a noun but as the adjective. We talk about salient. You see a difference, and then we would say, well, is it salient? Is it something? Is it important? Is it weighty? Okay, just so you know about that one. Okay, so here's a chart that in some ways represents the story I was telling about my husband and I. So we can look at the what we're looking at. Is the significance? Is the salience intercultural? Is it interpersonal? So let's reiterate. Interpersonal, low means people are in a sense interchangeable. If it's high, interpersonal, definitely this is something that is unique to the two people. So here, I know no one calls directory assistance, but let's say English-speaking caller calls a department, calls a store to find out some information from the English-speaking customer service rep. Same culture, doesn't really matter who's on the phone. So that's low for both of these. Okay. Parent and child discussing their changing relationship, definitely interpersonal. I mean, there are some who argue that parents and children belong to different cultures, but, we would say that isn't a big intercultural significance. Okay. This is the one that I was talking about. Spouses from different cultural backgrounds develop mutual understanding. Definitely interculturally significant and interpersonally significant. Okay, this one they put in the middle, saying that you've got able-bodied employees and disabled employees are figuring out ways to work effectively together. Why is that only middle of the intercultural? I guess you could argue that that could be high. I would say they're putting it in the middle because these are people who work at the same organization, so they've got that in common. Their intercultural difference has to do with the able-bodied versus disabled. Do we even say disabled anymore? I'm not sure. Okay. This one, the traveler unintentionally violates customs of a culture she or he doesn't understand. Well, obviously that's high because you're bringing your own culture to this new situation. It's high intercultural, but it's low on the interpersonal because you are not dealing directly. I see this as, I don't know, somebody um, reading a book set in Botswana, and they're saying that when you accept a gift, you you always accept it with two hands. Okay, well, we don't always do that in the United States. So you reach out one hand, and people are like, oh, kind of rude. Okay, so let's look at the last point in this first section that deals with the idea of generalizations. This is tricky. A word about generalizations and what's tricky about them. Generalizations can seem a lot like stereotypes because a generalization, you're making a big statement about a situation. And what you will notice in the textbook, to avoid stereotyping, they don't make blanket statements. They don't say men do this, women do this, people from the South do this, and people from the North do this. They use words like tend to, in many cases, most of the time. So what they're doing is they're qualifying statements, and that's making it a generalization. What happens is that the last line that says generalizations don't always apply, it becomes a stereotype when you are like insisting that this generalization that you've noticed applies to everybody across the board, no exceptions. Okay, and so what they say here is that they're making a generalization that greater differences, there can be greater differences within a culture than between cultures. And they have an interesting graphic on page 43 that looks at the United States, which is a fairly informal country, and then more formal cultures. And they show that someone in the United States who tends to be more formal is going to be more similar to someone from a formal culture than the United States. So is that important information? I think the idea to take away from this is, one, cultural practices are not totally different. That's two, sometimes we are more similar to people from other cultures than we are to people from our own cultures. And just because I or the textbook is making a generalization, make sure you don't see it as a stereotype, because it's important to realize that generalizations do not always apply. Okay, that is the end of this first section.